Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to another episode of the Simpa Life. I say another because I'm losing the numerical sequencing because, as you may notice by looking next to me, that's not Melanie Sykes. Me and Melanie did sit down and record our episode, as I promised you at the end of last week's episode. That'll be released at the end of the month for reasons that I will make you aware of later on. But for now, we have a wonderful guest who has jumped in the hot seat, a gentleman that I've been waiting to have a conversation with and a catch up for quite a while, given the vastness of what has been going on in sort of the CBD and the sort of the wellness market that is emerging here in the UK. So without further ado, we will softly segue onto this week's guest, who is the former member point of contact at the CTA, who is also the founder of the husband, wife, and dog team of the Hemp Hound agency, which is having an incredible amount of success I've seen over the past 12 months. In episode 17, you originally saw this guest. I think quite a lot has changed since. So I'm really excited to get into the conversation with today's guest, Cefyn Jones. How are you doing, brother?
I'm all good, sir. Thanks for having me back.
Very welcome. Like I say, you've been on my list for a good while. And every time I circle back to it, I go, I'll reach out, and then I go, but I know nothing about CBD right now. And I've realized that that's a good thing, because then I can sit here and play the novice consumer and kind of the individual who is just accessing it where they can at the minute. And they're seeing changes to the industry, to regulations, but they don't necessarily understand what's happening. So, I hope then we can jump kind of straight into the nitty gritty and kind of what's happened since February 2021 with CBD in the UK.
Oh, all shades of craziness. I think last time we talked, we were kind of vaguely mentioning about Kit Malthouse sticking his hand up and talking about controlled cannabinoids, and the BEIS, Business Energy Advisor, whoever they are, literally talking about, testing methods for cannabinoid-based products. Now, since that time, we've had the novel list created. We've had 5 validated companies, and then just about 1 year after the deadline, we had this massive explosion of other companies, the companies who have been about for a bit. And basically, they're all down as awaiting evidence, which is quite interesting because the validated companies, how could they be validated if they were working on the same timeline as everyone else? Why is everyone else still awaiting evidence? It's kind of craziness. And on top of that, we still got the updates for the Kit Malthouse scenario and the testing methods to come. So really the CBD industry is in a little bit of a limbo period. All of a sudden there is this list that we've all been working for, but there is a clear divide between some companies and the vast majority. We're still waiting for updates, which could influence companies that are on there. As we'll be looking for controlled levels of controlled cannabinoids. So a lot of companies could find themselves scratching their heads when those kind of updates come. But in a nutshell, craziness, because it is. Where are you? Where is the consumer? There's a lot of craziness going on, but where's the stockists? Are they to get some of these companies in who are awaiting evidence, or do they wait for these further updates from the Home Office that is to come? And, that in itself just kind of puts a lot of companies in a very, very weird place. Like I said, limbo's probably the best way to describe it at the moment.
Yeah, it's just sort of like a holding pattern. All it is, they're having sort of planes when they make them circulate airports, waiting for that opportunity for there to be clear point for them to land. And I guess the point of them landing at this point is a clear pathway towards lawful sales and profit in the creation of a profitable business. And it must be so difficult to be in charge of a brand or a company and then trying to gain access into the industry in the UK and going, all right, so what are the rules? And between, say, 2014 and 2020, there were certain unwritten rules. Most of them were wrong according to the actual law, as we knew at the time, but they became kind of the industry unofficial standard. And then obviously, we've seen this evolution from that, where it seems that a handful of players pushed quite heavily to regulation, and then eventually the system picked up and has gone too far with regulation. You said there that there was only 5 companies made it through in the first year.
That's it.
Who were the companies? Were they big boys, or were they sort of?
This is the interesting point. See, you were saying about unwritten rules and guidelines. One of the rules of this whole thing was that everyone should have a product on sale before the 13th of the 2nd, 2020. All right. Now, some of these validated companies certainly didn't have that at all. So we're looking at a list of loads of companies awaiting evidence, whilst there's 5 companies that have been validated. Now, to get validated, you need to go through a lot of paperwork, ensure everything is accurate, including direction from the FSA. And one of those things that included that direction for the 30th of February 2020 was that the FSA, through trading standards, was making a list of companies that had products at that time. Now, this seems to be getting forgotten, because the FSA recently have turned around to all companies who are awaiting evidence and said, please prove that you had products out there at this time, and that'll help you towards getting validated. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely 3 companies I know of that did not have products on sale at that time, but have been validated. So that's interesting. These are pharmaceutically based companies. I'll tell you one, for example, Brains Bioceuticals, right? They got validated last year, and they have a product range launch for novel approved products this spring, right? How is it then that they've got validated? Because the FSA said that, and it's not just them as well. There's another company, Curis, who have lab reports on their page that show that their first product wasn't actually available until after they were validated. Again, that's the FSA allowing other companies through the door under different rules that it imply to the wider industry, and that is the kind of frustration. So there's those 3 companies, but Australia as well, I believe. I haven't been able to find any product available other than in a medicinal setting. If they're selling a medicinal product, it's not food product. So why are you on the novel foods list? But equally, they still didn't have a product. Now, the other 2 companies, I'm not a little bit too certain on, so I won't go too in depth into them, but that's certainly 60% of the 5 validated companies on there, right? Versus, I believe, over 6,000 companies now, 6,000 products that are waiting for evidence. And it's like, how are these companies getting through that door? If you look at them, you'll see that they work by pharmaceutical tolerances. And the only reason why I think that they could be validated is that if there was any updates in regards to controlled cannabinoid levels and testing requirements, their products work like 6 decimal points, 6 zeros past the decimal point before you get to a number. So they're not going to be affected in any way. And I think that's where this kind of craziness is, misinformation versus looking at those companies and seeing what they have, what they're there for, and what they haven't done.
Yeah. Are any of the companies that you're aware of these 5, do they have a presence or a history of marketing products in other jurisdictions, I wonder? And then they could argue that they did have a product, just not on sale. Because if it's in the same formulation, one of the things I heard, and again, there was so much, as you said, like misinformation and deliberate disinformation to dissuade people from putting in applications or for putting in the wrong information. And one of the things that I heard was that if a similar product was validated or was set for approval, then your product would almost be given like a shadow approval. It would be by default almost approved because it's basically the same thing. And then from that, I heard a few white labelers and wholesalers were apparently being bumped up the queue because of the potential of the market underneath them. So whereas the guy at the mom and pop who had 3 products that have been on sale for 5 years, had brilliant efficacy, wicked tolerance, all of the toxicology, not toxicology, impurity reports, they're being left over there because the potential market share and thus the tax return from a regulated system is less than this white labeler who could come in and set up 6,000, 7,000 products, like companies selling their product, you know what I mean?
When we left the EU through Brexit, novel food was just going through its kind of planning stage, as it were. And one of those things that was immediately specified was that, if you didn't have a product on UK shelves, then you couldn't apply. Or you would have to go through the entirety of the process, which basically means that you wouldn't be able to sell a product until it was fully authorized. And we seem to have 3 states when it comes to this list: awaiting evidence, validated, and fully authorized. That can take up to 16 months, possibly even 2 years. So having a product in sale in France, that wouldn't really matter. That would only matter to the European Food Standards Agency and their novel food direction. But if you didn't have a product on sale, again, 13th of the 2nd, 2020, before that, then again, you're supposed to go through the entirety of the process, which basically means that those 3 companies that are validated shouldn't really be selling a product until they're fully authorized.
So if they just are they awaiting approval, or were they given the validation as the second step?
They were given validation as soon as they were put on that list. It wasn't we didn't come across awaiting evidence until the rest of the companies and products were put on there, and arguably, I think the FSA had to do it in that time, even though it taken them nearly a year to update that list. I think if it kind of continued a little bit longer, there was potential of legal matters to be raised, because it was basically given those 5 validated companies market confidence versus the rest of the companies who had jumped through all of the dateline hoops and were still waiting validation.
Yeah. Have the FSA themselves published? I remember reading and quoting in an article when I was doing my blog series, which I will be getting back to, folks. I'm just kind of setting up the new studio and stuff now. That they quoted 17 to 18 months. They said to go through the back hall, but they didn't explain the procedures of prioritization. So basically, it felt like they'd kind of gone, oh, 1 or 2, yeah, we can do that, get this one through, get that one through. Then there was this giant wave because all of a sudden, I think I can say this, allegedly, the CMC and the ACI were pushing companies to not fill in their applications or getting them to come to membership first and then being pushed through. Again, allegedly, that's what I heard from several smaller companies here in the UK. And then there was this just a point of consciousness where everyone just went, shit, the deadline's approaching. And everybody kind of flooded in. And it feels like either the FSA have got overwhelmed at that point and they've gone from a handful to just mountains of this evidence coming through and they've been overwhelmed, or there is a preferential system in place there, because you would assume the companies that are grandfathered in that have already got legacy would then be given preference because they've done all of the work. As you said, they're not these new boys turning up on the block, regardless of how much or how deep their pockets are, that they shouldn't be given that preferential treatment.
No. It's funny you should say that, actually, because I remember when Puris got validated and added to the list, and the founder of them turned around and said everyone knew what was happening in January 2019. For those who aren't up to date yet, I have no sympathy. Words along those lines. And it was like, well, I used to work for the CTA back then, and I remember when it was all kind of going crazy, and what had just come out in January 2019 was that there was a meeting at Bristol's to discuss novel foods and for the industry as a whole to argue the validity of CBD products. right? So for someone to say that they knew that there was a process going on before that meeting, it kind of suggests that there was two different kind of conversations going on, to put it as politely as I can. One with the five, shall we say, pharmaceutically kind of backed companies versus the wider industry, who are basically the competitors of the pharmaceutical industry. There is this kind of dual narrative that almost is suggested, and you've got to wonder sometimes if that's why it's dragging along as much as it is. Certainly with the industry as a whole, you said that companies were kind of leaving it into the last minute. That wasn't so much their fault as much as the information that was becoming available. I mean, one of the things that it took ages to find out was the definition of a new product. We understood that it would be a new extract, a new formula or something like that. But it took the FSA some time to turn around and say, basically, Company A and Company B have the same product, it's just a different label. Well, they're both different products. And on that basis, then you had to think like, oh, okay, then that needs to be separated. I need to be tied into this sub-license and whatnot. And that's where the kind of the craziness, last minute cramming came in. But it did certainly get a little bit crazy, but it wasn't the company's fault of leaving it too long. I think it was more the information that came available to the industry at that time.
I agree entirely. I think
that's for the ACI though. Sorry to cut you there. That's an interesting thing. I've heard lots of rumours about the ACI, but that one, I got to say that's a little bit of an intriguing one, and you've got to ask if it would be in their interests to get companies not to fill in applications. And you can say what you want about the ACI, but I don't think that that's actively in their interests. So
it was basically, I'll just clarify. So I'd heard allegations from either 2 or 3 different companies that they'd been dissuaded from filing paperwork unless they were first to apply for membership for either organization, which was around the time, I think, standardized for £20,000 for entrance. And then some of these countries, we've got companies were asking for these organizations for advice and were being rebutted unless they had the coffers to be able to throw it out. Oh God, sorry, cats jumping everywhere. I've got the money to be able to then.
Emails, mate. It is. You're right, and there was a lot of them. I've seen them all through the ACI lifespan. I still see them now. Like, join us or die. That's the premise of it. It is aggressive marketing, definitely. Is it illegal? I don't know at what point is it, but certainly it is a bit frustrating. I mean, back in the day, I used to get about 5, 6, 7 emails, all the same thing, thrown at me, and it was just like, what does it mean? What it means is basically someone's trying to scaremonger you into spending a lot of money that you might not have. That in itself, bit questionable, but
that's neoliberalism. That is what happens when you deregulate industries and the only incentive is quarterly profits. I think you then end up with just that for-profit model. You kind of lose the premise, the ethos and the ethics that you may have had for guiding you into that industry or that position in the first place. It's interesting. I've recently picked up a role as the community liaison representative for you boys at Product Earth. And I've been traveling around as part of road trips, going to various areas. And one of the, basically the hierarchy of what I'm seeing of the shops shutting seems to be predominantly the CBD hemp lifestyle shops first. Then it's the hydro ones taking the next whack, then the head shops. And so the CBD ones that I met in the Northeast, I met shops that have jumped through the loops, spent thousands. They've taken products off their shelves, bought in whole new ones, had to go find whole new white labelers and wholesalers. And then I've met guys that are like, yeah, we knocked this up at home. And they still get it. They get it tested. They get the product brought in, and they then produce themselves. They have their own sort of in-house testing and they create their own regulation. And what I'm seeing is basically the trading standards at the minute are still quite impotent. They have yet to be given teeth. We've been told they will be the attack dog, but at the minute it's just a little puppy. So there are various people and pockets in the area of the country kind of going, well, we'll what does it, make hay while it's sunny, and then there are others who have got this mindset of the apocalypse is kind of coming, and it's crap, because then the consumer's stuck in the middle going, I just want good products. I want what we had a few years ago. They can't see all of this nuance and this bickering between industry and regulators and the government and the Home Office. So like, what is happening with trading standards at the minute, and the idea of then being punished for selling the wrong CBD at the minute?
At the moment, that's another kind of up and down affair. When the list was updated recently, the FSA suggested that the trading standards should take note. There was also other people who turned around and said that trading standards should take note, but we won't talk about the ACI too much. But then, a few companies kind of pointed out that they were part of wider applications. There was a few companies who, were with IA or the ACI, and they were seeing companies who they were part of their application with getting listed, but theirs hadn't been processed. And it was like, well, hold on, if you're turning around and saying to trading standards, now's the starting point, don't you think that's a little bit inappropriate, as we're still waiting for more companies and products to be listed? There was a bit of a backlash on that. I do believe that's been suspended, although trading standards have kind of been told that if they do go somewhere and they see a product that isn't on the list, then they need to kind of get proof, application number, and give the FSA a bell. But there's still another update to come. And there's going to be products removed. There's already been 35 products removed for various reasons, whether legitimate or otherwise. So if I was trading standards, I don't think I'd even touch it till about August.
Why till about August? What's with the time frame there?
You would have thought it'd be settled down by then. I think there's another update come. I can't quite remember when it is. I think it was June. July, possibly even then, if there's any questions to come of it, any companies that need to come off it, that I think we would kind of see from that point at least a level of stability, if that is the case. But even then, we got all of these companies still awaiting evidence. And as soon as that evidence from these joint application comes in, the FSA have got over 6,000 products to go through. So even then, we're probably not going to see a great deal of validated companies for some time. Other than the 5 already there. Yeah.
And so, I mean, my inclination is to have maybe somewhat of a kind of conspiratorial or paranoid thought towards that. I think we're going to see the larger companies, I would theorize that we're going to see the larger companies float to the top as they're shaking and sieving it all out and working through it. One of the things that I'm acutely aware of is this evidence they get for the validation of the product is then going to create a body of data that validates their own premise. It doesn't give us anything towards moving the percentages forward. Do you know what I mean, in terms of what they're in the products? So it's one of the things I wanted to ask you is I've heard different sources and not really sure where like who to believe at this point, I guess. Whole plant, where do we stand with whole plant in the UK? Has there been any authorization at all of anything other than isolates put together to create the broad spectrum term?
There are products that have been validated that are plant derived. There is another product that's been validated that is derived from, shall I say, yeast excrement, but that's a different kettle of fish. When it comes to whole plant, that's a bit of a tricky one. I know IA have got some trials proved for full spectrum products, but this is where we kind of need to look at the landscape of what's happening. And what worries me about all of this craziness is the impending update in regards to controlled cannabinoids. that in itself has the potential to really knock out whole plant products. One of the suggestions that's going about at the moment is 50 micrograms per day RDA of THC. That's just THC though, and that's not really.
What's that numerically?
Numerically, bugger.
I'm trying to think like so people can visualize how small that is. It's like 0.
If you've got a 0.2% THC product, 10 mil oil, I think it would be just over 1.5 drops for 4 days.
Right. So that is so microscopically low that almost negates the natural process. You would have to, in some way, extract, remove, or reconstruct the end product, because to get such microscopically low levels, that nature doesn't do it like that.
Which then comes into the whole world of novel foods, because it's basically processed. However, going back to the whole plant angle, I would suggest to a lot of your viewers who maybe do own shops and they're getting rather frustrated in regards to the restrictions on the whole plant, that they consider looking into cold press hemp products. One of the things that's mentioned on the FSA's website is that cold press hemp and derivatives is novel exempt. Now, you've got to look at their words carefully. At no point have they ever said that it's cold press hemp seed oil, right? So you can get a full spectrum, unmessed about product in that way. And of course, forgive me for plugging the Hemp Hound, but if you do go to the Hemp Hound directory, there are a few companies there that will be able to help out with cold pressed product needs. The difference is that it's not a CBD product, it's more a hemp product that has CBD in.
Good on the companies for finding the loophole. I applaud anybody that looks at the landscape of a system and goes, oh, well, lads, we're going that way, and finds a fucking way through. Literally, bravo. The other side of me, obviously, me and the word hemp. Obviously, I'm giving kind of a more laid back in this conversation, because you and I have discussed this in the past, and I'm probably going to continue to discuss it infinitum. But it's interesting that then hemp is not defined technically in a standardized way in the UK. So all of these cannabidiol CBD products, the companies are marketing themselves as deriving it from hemp. But it's then they're arguing that it's the process, because the cold presses existed for so-called hemp seed oil and hemp milks and etc. as food, as in a very long established history of industry. So they get their exemption because of their legacy of that, of a proof that they've had there's evidence of that historically, legitimately, lawfully, it's paid tax, etc. Whereas they're then arguing.
Pope Martin II from the 14th century, he loved a bit of cold pressed hemp in his soup every lunchtime.
Again, we've got, as here, Trev Coleman shouting in the back of my head, Oliver Twist, Oliver Twist. Yeah, the gruel that was served in the Victorian era in the UK. But again, that was a hemp seed, because again, it was complete protein. It's an amazing omega balance as well. It's interesting that the actual food cannabis is then gone, oh, that's hemp, we'll put it over here. That's food, that's what we're talking about. Novel food, again, it's this language, it's very frustrating me. I'm going through kind of investigation into my own mental health at the minute to determine potentially whether I have autism. And I'm thinking part of my work would make sense with this as to why I'm so stubborn and unable to understand certain things. Because to me, they're bastardizing the language. We were all given the same English, and we're all supposed to have the same definitions and understanding of words, but then the establishment have legalese as well. And then there's almost this third dictionary, which they're drawing from in cannabis. So we try and standardize our language amongst ourselves, and then they just suddenly start using different words for different meanings. And then we go and chase that. And then a few years later, they update it again, and we're chasing that. And it's an insanity. We're just trying to constantly catch our tail. And I think, as you said before, it is this what did you call it? This limbo that we're in. You know, it's like for you Dragon Ball Z fans out there, your hyperbolic time chamber. Every day feels like a year. It's just you're stuck forever. So many companies are just falling at the wayside because they just don't want to play this game anymore. They'd rather either go back to a somewhat unlawful marketplace or move on to a different sort of industry and try and wait it out. My fear is that this is entirely their game plan, and all the people that go, I'll come back in a couple of years, you're never going to be able to get back in. Look at the licensing cost in America for dispensaries. It's like $1 million plus just to get one piece of paper. And that's of a compendium of bits of paper you need. And then you need to grease all of those wheels and keep all, it's a classist system. And this is one of the things that's really bugging me more and more recently, because the UK, we can really see our institutional classism being borne out in the way we're dealing with this cannabis conversation.
Do you know, I think you're right, mate, in all honesty, in regards to being tested potentially for autism, because you get focused. I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic, and I do kind of get a little bit hyper-focused on topics myself. But certainly when you look at the political classes, the higher classes, they do seem to kind of see our lips moving, but not really hear our words. You know what I mean? It is, you know, don't touch skunk. You know, how many people get frustrated with that, whilst also knowing that, you know, GW are growing skunk and genetic variables. You know, that's ignoring public for the pocket wealth of others, and it does get a little bit more kind of frustrating. I mean, for example, there was a politician last couple of days that was highlighted as not declaring his interests in a medicinal cannabis company, a Tory. Can't remember his name, but you know, he was a little bit annoyed, but you know, he got off of it by saying thanks to the ombudsman for bringing this up and bringing it up quickly, and sorry it won't happen again. Well, hold on, what's he got like interest to medicinal cannabis companies when he's on a government that is maintaining prohibition? That to me seems a little bit, you know, conflict, you know, beyond anything else. I mean, it doesn't matter if he goes to the chambers and or doesn't go to the chambers and votes on any drug reform at all. Doesn't mean he's not going to other chambers and having little chats with buddies like, you know, we'll just keep this away from these people. Oh, let's go and get that drugs minister to draw doubt on controlled cannabinoid levels. You know, any of that can kind of happen. And yet, you know, it's like Cardiff. You were out there with Phil Monk yesterday, and you know, there's a lot of passionate people there, right? All saying that, you know, the law's wrong. We should have the freedom of choice. So why are they not getting heard? And I think, you know, it just comes back to that money thing. And unfortunately, you know, there has to be a way of highlighting it. And I think you pointing out the classist, because I never thought about it that way until you mentioned it. But I think, yeah, you're spot on there, mate.
Thank you. It's nice to be, have that confirmation, especially from somebody like yourself that's still quite within this and as of the industry. Do you know what I mean? I've said this to a lot of people that are not involved in actively involved in the industry, and they'll agree with me. I respect their opinion and appreciate it. But yeah, I've recently got a bee in my bonnet because of the Cardiff March. Something had been building up for a while. I've recently wrote an article for Weed World that's coming out, which starts quite contentiously. I basically opened by saying that the 2012 election victories in Colorado and Washington were the first great victory for the cannabis liberation movement in the 21st century. And as I'm now going to argue, probably the last. And I just draw attention to some serious problems that we still have: the criminalization, the murder rates, the exploitation, the criminalization, all of these elements that come along with this, while some individuals are allowed to become vastly wealthy that still demonize us. They don't consume cannabis. They look down on us for consuming cannabis. They look at our history and our legacy, and they want to whitewash it. They want to gentrify our culture and rewrite what cannabis is to their definition so they can make profit from it. And as I advocate in every position I now take up, whether it be with Seed Our Future, Product Earth, you know, with my writing work, is to advocate for the consumer, because these guys can spend billions and build this industry, and yeah, they'll make bank off trading and selling to each other, but it'll keep collapsing time after time, because we want what we want, and we fought for 50 years. and we're going to fight for another 50 if necessary. I know that now our ranks seem low and our numbers seem low. And that's because of apathy. That's because of this kind of astroturfing of these various movements. They've infiltrated and they've got, right, get CBD out. We've got that. Go, go, go. Get hemp out. Go, go. We got that. Get medical. Go, 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 go. We got that. And they've just divided us and broken us off. And the argument is still true that the kids that deserve access means that I deserve access for whatever reason, that you do, that anyone else does. You know what I mean? It's the idea that the same elements and people that for decades have demonized and criminalized us can now profit from it. They shouldn't get to set, like I use the analogy of an abuse victim, right? We are, as a cannabis community, we have been in a domestic violent relationship. They declared a war on us as pacifists 50, 60 years ago and have been fighting it ever since. All we've done is quietly live and try and keep our culture alive and spread it through the generation, you know, from adult to adult. And, you know, the people that want to join us and share our knowledge and our experience. They've come and taken that now and they're building everything they're building. These $100 million facilities they're building, that's of our experience and our suffering. That's because we went to prison. That's because we were scared of the blue light. That's because we lived the life we've had to live. And that's my stance on this at the minute. I know for a lot of people in the industry, they're going to go, ooh. And it's not to say that you're all wrong. And I'm not saying everybody that's making money from cannabis is bad here, but we have to look at it that if you are making cannabis while still perpetuating that others are bad for doing it, that's kind of profiteering and racketeering. The whole prescription system at the minute is, I had Clark French on recently, and I used the analogy of it being like racketeering, like, you know, oh, this is a nice bit of health you got here. It'd be a shame if somebody were to make it worse. You know, you got to pay for your piece of paper. And he went, no, that's entirely what it is. And that's, again, not to badmouth any of the 15,000 plus patients. People deserve access, and however you choose to get it, that's why I applauded the companies before. At this point, I'm just appreciative of human ingenuity. If you're actually trying to get at that end goal, go. But if you are not, you are my enemy. You are a prohibitionist and you are profiteering from the perpetuation of this war. And that's a hard stance. It's a hard stance. But there are ways. There are ways we can do this. The companies could offset. All right, let's set up a fund. All right, imagine a cannabis union in the UK. Every company that's profiting from cannabis in any direction puts 5% of their yearly profit into it. That organization only fights for the ubiquitous descheduling and end of the war on cannabis. They fund the marches. We had 350 in Cardiff with a bunch of us organizing it from the old school, right? In Madrid, they had tens of thousands because the company sponsored it. They shut down streets. They had banners. They had this carnival atmosphere. Why are we not doing that in this country? Look around the world, there's 180 odd cities that participated. Why in the UK, when we produce the most cannabis lawfully in the world, are we not being given the opportunity to buy access?
Sorry, my father rang me. How dare he? Yeah. Do you know what? I don't know where that kind of finished, but I do believe that you really hit the nail on the head there. This conquer. I've seen a lot of people online recently that are really trying to draw the divide between recreational and medicinal, and it's like, well, recreational could be an alternative form of access to medicinal. What's the problem? But there seems to be this clear kind of you only get it if you're prescribed, and I don't think that's appropriate whatsoever. Am I as militant as your good self? Well. No, I mean, I'm for the whole plant, root to the buds. I work with a few people who are focused, in certain areas where they kind of are more open to restricting the rest of the plant for their means, shall we say. That's not to say that I don't, I'm trying to think polite words here. That's not to say that I don't disagree with the need of the plant in that sector. I just believe that, there should be a wider acceptance of it. And going back to that medicinal versus recreational, I just want to throw this one thing in, right? One thing that is really, really getting forgotten in this entire scenario, which is probably backed up with low numbers and people getting a little bit kind of confused, is the cultural use of cannabis. right? Where does that stand? In this equation, and I wonder why that's kind of being forgotten. Like it's almost like the the pro versus anti-vaxxer, but then you had some people who had a couple of jabs, and then all of a sudden they didn't want to take another, and they were labelled as anti-vaxxers.
Or the people that medically couldn't.
You couldn't have an either. No middle. That's where this divide and conquer crap is working too well in the.
It's if you look at it, it's basically. Sorry about the.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry. There's a really extreme audio came through there. I'm not sure where it came from.
I just back this side, mate. That sounded quite high.
Yeah. I'm sorry, guys. I'll try and edit that out. I'm going to make a note of the time so we try and get rid of whatever that gremlin was there.
Energy. I want to endorse them over this call.
That would have been perfect time to have a product placement. So it's weird because it's the neoliberalistic kind of thing since Thatcherism and Reaganomics in the 80s that created this binary narrative in politics. You were for something or against it. You were one side or the other side. There was no middle ground. And it made it so much easier for there to just be this revolving door of politics. So the same group of people, regardless of what color they painted themselves or what words they spoke and the lip service they paid to the public, they could have this system of revolving from CEO positions and boards of various companies into politics and back out. And even a lot of people shifted parties because, again, their allegiances are not down to their ideals. Do you know what I mean? It's down to the bottom dollar. And consequentially, I think this has led to this kind of system that we're in now where, again, to speak of those companies, I don't really, again, blame them. I believe that we need specific CBMPs for use in children. A child cannot make an informed decision about its own relationship to cannabis, whereas an adult can. And I think that the reason they're working so hard, or feels like it, is to get this medicinal thing, and they're trying to cap it in there, is we don't have autonomy of our health in this country. We are supposed to surrender that relationship, almost like the deity relationship of history, to a doctor. It's almost like, oh, this thing happened to me. And you go to the doctor and he goes, here, take this thing. Whereas instead of going, well, why did this happen? What's your lifestyle? We're not trained how to live. Whereas cannabis, people that consume cannabis, they seem to develop a more active lifestyle, paradoxically against this lazy narrative. And I think CBD and wellness, that niche of an industry, should exist, the same as the CBMPs, the same as the agricultural industrial applications. So graphene concrete, as I'm terming it now, concrete, folks. I like that. Hits the ear a little bit better. Also, Hempcrete is a brand name of a company. It's kind of like the vacuum Hoover debate all over again. So I just believe that will get further, all of it, if we're all allowed that innovation. So rather than some people being given those first advantages and being able to get 10, 20 years into the industry, and then when they go, oh, we've discovered this thing. Yeah, we've known it and lived it for 70 years, but they're going to be able to create the industry from it. And it creates this paradigm where the culture stops. And they, like I said, they create these new avenues of history, and they get to converge that into this narrative that it was a bunch of investment bankers and conservative politicians that made cannabis what it is today, you know? So it's very long-winded, and I'm not sure if there's a question in there.
You know what, mate? I think it kind of draws onto that petition that I was hoping to talk to you about. In order to, do we get to a point? Can we push forward? Would we accept being pushed backwards? This is a big issue. So recently I discovered that there is an inquiry on recreational drugs that is going to be conducted by the Home Affairs Committee. Right now, I got quite interested about this and had a little look. And lo and behold, Jazz GW Pharmaceutical had laid a submission. Now, I believe that this is a very, very interesting document because it confirms, first and foremost, that was something that has been suspected in the industry for some time. And that is GW stating that they have had a very strong working relationship with the Home Office for over 20 years, right? Big question. How many companies, singular or otherwise, should have close working relationships to government organisations? agencies. We don't even see that with, we're not supposed to see that kind of behavior in the FSA and novel foods kind of arena. They themselves turn around and say that we talk to all industry stakeholders all over the show. However, when it comes to GW, let's be honest, there's only one stakeholder there. So this document, basically, not only does it state that they've got an over 20-year strong working relationship, but it also states a few kind of other concerning bits and pieces that ultimately not only affects CBD products, but really could have the potential to delay, if not stop, any kind of recreational market in the UK. All right. The first one is in regards to controlled cannabinoids. Now, it's very interesting because GW have 146 patents that involve cannabinoid preparations that all involve controlled cannabinoids, and one or two have CBD in there. They want that restricted because apparently controlled cannabinoids are dangerous. But if controlled cannabinoids are dangerous, then where does that lead towards any kind of recreational ground, let alone a full plant product in the CBD world? They further state that the CBD world needs further political intervention. Further. I mean, it's farcical as it is. If there's more, then that's obscene. And then basically it's rounded up without saying it, but basically saying, don't give them recreational. Really, people should only have access to cannabinoids via the medicinal or a severely restricted food supplemental route. Past there, yeah.
This is what. Sorry, go on.
So basically, I've drawn up a petition because I've been trying to explain to people for some time that actually what's happening in the CBD world does have implications for any recreational market. Right. And on that basis, and of course, any kind of influence that GW get in their way would cause on the wider UK market, I've created a petition. Right. Now, this petition is different, because every one of these petitions beforehand has been legalize cannabis, decriminalize cannabis, but they've always got a copy and paste reply for that. There's no point in continually asking the same question. So basically, I've put together a petition that requests that GW's influence outside of the medicinal sector is revoked. Because at the moment in novel foods, the whole requirements are based around 16 lab reports from GW Pharmaceutical. All right. And now they're turning around and saying, don't give them recreational. That shows that GW have more power in cannabis in the UK than they should do. That's one company with one government agency. It should be lots of companies or trade associations liaising with the Home Office, not one company saying, hey, we're coming around, we've got the hobnobs, can we have a chat about controlled cannabinoid? And that's pretty much what it is. So, basically, the petition's there and it requests that their influence is revoked. And if you got this far in this video, thanks for my rambling, but certainly please feel free to check out that petition.
It'll be in the description below, folks. Do check it out. I will be plugging it across all social media platforms because exactly that. They're so used to their copy paste response to the same questions, and we tweak it little by little and we pass it around, and it creates in a lot of way apathy, or it creates false hope of a little bit of groundswell for a couple of days, and it never really kind of moves things forward. And I think that exactly that, rather than this kind of anti-stance. We spoke of this on the podcast recently with Neil Woods as to why Leap changed its name to remove against in the language. And I think what we discussed in that in terms of how changing the position can change how successful the process is moving forward. So I think that, something's coming through on the mic. I don't know where it's coming. I wonder if it's that rubbing on the cover. All right, sorry about that, folks. I've just lost my train of thought. Nope, gone. Derailed. Oh, wait, petition. Yes, sorry, I'm back in the room. So sign the petition. I'll be pushing it because, again, the government at the minute, they've, as I said, struggling to really have a conversation about it. But if we can draw the hypocrisy, draw attention to this, because, again, I don't know why the mainstream media are not on this, or legacy media is now being termed, because this is successive governments of both parties. They said 20 years. That means we've had New Labour, you've had whatever Brown Labour was, you know what I mean? That kind of muddying of the red colours, as it were, or a fortification of red, depending on your political stance, and then into the successive, the coalition and the Conservative governments. That means we've had three political parties have been in position where they should have been having judicial oversight over the Home Office and other regulatory parts of the government, to ensure that there wasn't these monopolies, there wasn't this ability. I mean, we've known in the public arena for a long time that GW have been the world's largest lawful producer of medicinal cannabis, you know, into derivable products. One of the things that worried me when they released Epidiolex, being a predominant CBD product, was that we were going to see on what I suspected at the time, and I think we're seeing the steps towards that, is there being a CBD light industry, which is, you can go and try it and go, actually, yeah, get a bit of relief from that. You know, it's predominantly isolate products reconstituted into broad spectrum products. And then people get a few weeks of efficacy before then they get a tolerance and whatever else, and it doesn't quite give them the same. They then go, oh, okay, I'll go to my doctor, or I'll go to my, as it'll be, because I feel that this is twinned with the destruction of the NHS, towards my private healthcare provider. And then from there, you'll be able to then access cannabinoids. But yeah, this idea of there being, you know, a 30%, you know, 3,000 milligram or anything like that product, that'll be long gone. You'll have to spend several £100s to get up to the level of what you would get at the clinic level. I think that's how they're going to restrict it. And they're going to fight against flowers. The reason I think the flowers are being left on specials is, again, data set collection, to then understand, all right, these terpenoids and these cannabinoids together, we put all this, we can formulate that into these vape pens, get them transitioned from that to that, then get them transitioned onto oils and patches and the other derivable products that we want to sell, that we've already patented, that we've spent 20, 30 years researching quietly while criminalizing and imprisoning these people.
You know, going back to that data set, that's an interesting idea, but what if it was further having the plant restricted to the point that it would be completely outlawed, more so than it is? That's certainly one of my fears. I did mention that there's one company that you know, advertises a CBD product that comes from yeast crap. You know, genetically modified yeast. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, it's CBD. No, it's yeast crap. You know, and should it be described as CBD? Well, it's not from a plant. It's an alternative. Surely it's got to have a different name. The weirdness of it all, though, is that the company in question that's selling this yeast crap, I can't call it anything else, it's basically down on the novel register as having an ultra-fine CBD product. Right, not labelled as synthetic whatsoever, right, and I think that shows some kind of intent, because this is about this whole novel foods scenario is being run under the guise of public safety, all right, public safety, public awareness, public education, all right. Why is it then not a legal requirement for you to define your product, whether synthetic or otherwise? Because there is no such law. You go to the novel list, it doesn't say synthetic, it says ultra pure. You know, it's not until you actually go on their website and do a bit of digging that they say, well, actually harvesting CBD from hemp is rather ineffective, so we've gone a different way. Okay.
Yeah.
The big interesting thing of this is that company has been validated off 60 lab reports that I've mentioned already, but those lab reports are brought together off the basis of plant-derived cannabinoids, right? So how is it that a company that provides a synthetic cannabinoid product can get through on the basis of plant-derived cannabinoid research? It does not make sense to me. But what it does certainly make me worry about is that a kind of potential window to the future, because, I mean, we see the world becoming liberalized, but, take the plant out and make it from yeast. I mean, that's complete medicinal lockdown.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other side of it is there's a company in America called Peels, fronted by a former basketball player, and they use orange peels to do a similar synthesis to create a purified, I think they classify it as CBD. Look at, obviously, Cellular Goods, the Beck-and-Back venture that obviously was in the news recently because they've failed currently to get authorization and threatening lawsuits and whatever else. It's insane. And it does to me, I've always stated that they will co-opt enough of our culture to get us on board and get us used to their delivery methods and their culture and their way of playing the neoliberalist capitalist game and having to pay constantly, hand over fist, more money than you can ever afford. That's always constantly going up with inflation to get access to ever dwindling products because they refine it more. And this, to me, says that they're speaking the language of the medicinal sector. The medicinal cannabis industrial complex, as I call it, because they define currently cannabinoids a therapeutic. Anything else in that product is a contaminant. So currently terpenes are not looked at as having medicinal properties because they're already caught up in a whole other charade of bullshit with botanical terpenes. And that's got caught up in holistics, and that's been demonized for fucking decades. So we'll park that over here. We know that simplistically, CBD, THC, it's all about ratios. Go prescribe, go make products, go do your things. And like you said, this is now if they're following that narrative to its next level, that is this pure CBD. And then if you can derive it, this was never grown in a field. It was never outside. So they'll almost present it that exactly that. It's pure, it's cleaner, it's safer. But we've never consumed those kind of products. There is no history, no evidence, efficacy, whereas we have the entirety of human fucking history to show our interactions with this plant and with the individual cultivars that express in different ways, as we discussed with Kyle Espelin, as part of how hemp isn't hemp, even though he's the head of the Scottish Hemp Association, that in Asia, the predominant cultivars present as dominant THC to CBD, whereas in then the West, because of, again, interventions, different cultivars, climates, adaptions, etc., the expressions are higher CBD. So there is no real consensus to any of this. So each pocket is getting to put their own thing together. And whereas I see a lot of other countries coming on board now and really trying to do it right and trying to involve everybody, the UK is this little island amongst everything, trying to bypass cannabis and go to the next point, as you said, and then go, we've got all the medications in the world. So if they see the plant, see a leaf, smell it, any use of the word, you're a criminal, you're bad. And I see that as well. I'm scared that it's going to lead to a further classification, that all these stories of edibles killing, killing young successful women, as it was framed as like this tragedy because she wasn't lower class. Do you know what I mean? Whereas they presented the way the ones that are diluting it, when all they're trying to do is they're entrepreneurs that are then seeing what's happening around the world, that are now actually reforming the dealing market, that are trying to fight against the Albanians, these Lithuanians, these triad gangs, these huge, vastly international criminal organizations that are starting to dominate the UK sector. And yet we're being vilified and made to be the bad guys. So there's now the prohibitionists, as far as I'm concerned, they're gangsters in suits. You've got the gangsters in tracksuits and the gangsters in suits. Only difference is they've got enough money and bully power to change the law for their benefit.
Yeah, well, let's hope that they don't, mate. But certainly going back to that petition, the fact that the GW have been put in a position where they're able to kind of explain at least a game plan or game plan of sorts, gives us all something to fight about. Whether we do kind of come to the other crazinesses that were touched on then, total dominance, kill the plant, bring in yeast crap. I mean, that to me is just simply horrific, and would basically be demonizing further a plant that we've evolved with.
Well, yeah, what scares me is Jazz bought out GW at a very interesting time. There was a big fervor of a kickoff of a lawsuit about extraction that GW were facing at the time. And rumors were that this is one of the things that made a few of the larger stakeholders kind of go, all right, we could maybe be interested in stepping out of this. And, we've done our bit, going to go off and go live their lives. And you got to remember, Jazz is an oncologist specialist, cancer. You know, GW, of those 146, as you quoted before, several of them are of cannabinoids causing apoptosis, cannabinoids preventing cancer. So I think that's the thing that scares me, is if in our culture, the cancer is a huge industry. It's gone in my lifetime from 1 in 4 your chance of getting it to 1 in 2. It's likely soon to be that you're going to get cancer at some point. Just depends what kind and how you deal with it. That's what it's kind of looking like. Whereas cannabis, again, because of the properties of THC and minor cannabinoids, we're seeing this prophylactic argument, this prophylactic mechanism. So why isn't there an argument that we can go, all right, can we not use it prophylactically? That's medically, but we choose to do that. So rather than deburdening that, we could deburden that system. And it then goes back to the conspiracy of, people go, we don't have healthcare, we have sick care in this country. And it's all about maintenance rather than it is repair.
Yeah, that's bang on the money there. I think it is about restricting you to the point of you can only have access to this if you are ill. However, if you had access to it, then it's not a medicine; it's more of a food, because it's
a vitamin in that way. Yeah.
Pieces, and that's pretty much the way that I see it. Everyone else getting kind of, this versus that versus it's food. It doesn't matter if you smoke it; it's still a food for your endocannabinoid system. If you eat it, yeah, it's more of a food. Fair enough. It gives you a little bit more than smoking, but for people to kind of hold you to ransom on, it's like they're disregarding the endocannabinoid system until it becomes profit worthy for them, and that's human rights, and that's good, because at the end of the day, we got our a right to life, Article 2 on the 98 Human Rights Act, and that should really extend to, I want to top up my endocannabinoid system. That recreational, supplemental, or medicinal. I have that, not you. And I think that's where kind of people are pulling it apart. I mean, another example of that. Have you come across the Statista poll in regards to cannabis and recreational drug approval ratings since 2019?
No, I haven't.
Been over 50%. Since 2019, 1 year after medicinal cannabis was legalized. But it's not been mentioned recently, until recently, right, when Sadiq Khan launched his pipe. And then someone turned around and said, I've over 54% approval rating. Well, the reason why it hasn't been brought up before is because that's split between those who want legalization and those who want decriminalization. The actual boundaries of what they give on those two are kind of vague, in all honesty. But that's why no one's kind of brought it up, because it's being split up. And on top of that, the actual statistics are hidden in cannabis and recreational drugs. Yeah. And it's people feeding you a line that suits their narrative. But if you certainly look at bits and pieces more, with an open mind, you can actually see a lot of what's at play in them. There is a lot of people in the UK that want cannabis laws liberalised. Mm-hmm. That's the easy putting it, but no, we're going to have to make it 39% of this and 24% of that because all of it is 50%. And those the people that we're working with. Yeah.
It's smart. It's incredibly smart if you look at it. It's, you go, there's this giant population. All right, give me a binary. Boom, you cut them in half. Give them a binary. Boom, cut them in half. Boom, give them a binary, cut them in half. And that's what I'm saying about that is neoliberalism in action. That's how it is manifested through modern politics. And they did it beautifully. So where are we? Say we're 2001. You got Colin Davies, you got Chris Baldwin, you've got Winston Matthews, all these crew opening up these coffee shops based on the Dutch models in the UK. You've got then Jackie Stewart and that having conversations in the Home Office in that they're going to potentially lower cannabis from B2C, and it's all then based on compassion and medicinal access. And so then over this period of time, they then have these conversations. Clearly, I would say the GW were influential in this. Over a 5-year period, there was kind of this assumption that the law will change, and the law eventually changes. For a couple of years, it's then immediately changed. and reverted back. But in this time, they'd created this paradigm of awareness in the public that cannabis can have medicinal properties. They'd gone that we should be the ones to give you that, whereas before we were demanding that we all take it and have it. So they'd cut us in half. And then they spent years creating their own campaigns, creating their own think tanks, creating their own organizations and entities and investment vessels, preparing, and then they hijacked CBD. You know, they were the same ones that hijacked the vape industry when that started. Do you know what I mean? So then they moved into CBD. There's then the same ones that are actually gentrifying into the hemp system at the minute of the agricultural applications and what they're doing with the move towards new regulations. So then they've then further divided us again with the CBD. They're thinking, all right, if you're just CBD, don't say the cannabis word, you guys get to go over there. Then they went hemp, all right, you guys, you get to go over there. Don't ever say you're cannabis, you're only hemp, go over there. And then what's left in the middle is the radicals like myself, who were just like, yeah, I'm a druggie. In the same way, I drink so much coffee some days, my heart hurts. You know what I mean? I used to smoke a 20 box of cigarettes every day. Do you know what I mean? I used to drink like 20 pints over a weekend back in the day. What's the difference between if I like to go to the woods and take acid? You know, I like to have some mushrooms here and there. I enjoy consuming cannabis and I actually do get a therapeutic benefit from it. There is no difference, but the absurdity now, I look insane. Whereas all I'm saying is the same thing we were saying 20 years ago, but they've divided us and they've created these media narratives, these campaigns and these organizations and entities that are such single subjects that they are not allowed to discuss beyond their subject. So then people go, well, which I want to go to is I'll climb this tower and get on this. I'm hemp now. I'll see you later. Maybe we'll be cannabis later. Maybe in 20 years I can talk to you and we could share a shop or something. And everyone just goes off. And they're now in the middle demonizing us to then, while they weaponize each of those towers, they take them over and they fortify them and they become prisons. And then one by one, they'll destroy them for their narrative. And that, I know that sounds very doom and gloom, but I'm a child of history. You know what I mean? I'm a Northerner. I've seen what conservative politics do. I'm a child that was born into an era where neoliberalism took over the fucking world, and I've watched the world suffer for it. And I see cannabis justice as class justice. That if you give the people, the oppressed, an opportunity just to live. Most people only want a couple of plants and maybe a couple of extra grand a year. You know, if the kids could have a nice holiday, they could have a bit more clothes to take to school. You know, they could now eat 2 meals a day because 6.4 million people, 6.4 million people now, according to the recent statistics, only have 1 meal a day. One in this country, in the UK. What the fuck is going on here? Yet they're destroying our homes and raiding us for setting up little grows and being able to sell to Jimmy down the road, you know, keeping Dave out of, you know, getting back onto cocaine, you know, keeping people from drinking themselves to death, you know, allowing them to socialize in ways that, yeah, are counterintuitive to the current paradigm, but are exactly what we need to keep our communities alive.
I eat 1 meal a day.
But you know, but you know what I mean? In terms of that, those are the choices that people are having to make. The economics are fucked. Yet billions is made in the cannabis industry every year in this country right now, illicitly, unlawfully, because they won't let us pay tax. Yet, ironically, most legal growers, decent home growers, pay tax on their newts, their feed, their electricity, their water, their seeds. They're paying more tax than Google, more than Microsoft, more than Amazon. Do you know what I mean? They're more productive to the coffers of our country. And ironically, they're paying for their fellow brethren to be raided and attacked and vilified by this armed militia in the police. You know, the police were set up and established to protect us from the state. So Robert Peel established the Peelian principles to ensure that the public and the police were the same thing. They weren't the elite. They were established to keep the military off our streets, to stop the governments from bringing fucking armed people on into your home. There was supposed to be this buffer, and they were supposed to represent us to them, not represent them to us. And we've lost this relationship. And it is this horrible thing. They're protecting corporate interest, political interest over the people. And honestly, we flip that switch. And this is why I'm arguing for deschedulization, not legalization or decriminalization, because descheduling means as soon as it's out of order, we have then go, where do we put it? Where's tobacco and sugar and alcohol? All right, we're putting it with that lot. Okay, cool. All right, so then you need basic hygiene to produce it. You've got logistics rules. You've got tax rules. You've got all of the other infrastructure exists. We're building more lies of a prison on top of the foundation of the grandest lie. And none of them can seem to see it either through willful ignorance or, like you said, they see our lips, but they just don't hear us.
Yeah, and that's whilst they're all divided as well. It's coming to people saying, "What's the point?" That's dangerous. Some of them will just be fed up of the same old, same old. The others will be kind of looking around the world, hoping that some politician is going to have some golden beam thought that unlocks us to, where the states are or whatnot. But I think the longer that people don't really kind of say anything is the sooner that we kind of get to a point where that plant is completely shackled beyond anything that we could kind of consider, whether that's complete removal or just absolute access in some way. I mean, it will be interesting, though, to see how the police would kind of respond to that, considering, what you said about that loss of relationship. I mean, they do seem to be a little bit more kind of skeptical on policing cannabis. I mean, I certainly would if I'd arrested someone who had a prescription and didn't know, or if I was called to the post office because some prescription was being sent through and they didn't realise and thought it was full-blown wacky. And then the judicial systems, there seems to be a lot more judges kind of offering people help with their addictions as opposed to going to jail. I think we even talked about it last year when it was suggested that the police forces were, in fact, allowing a level of decriminalisation occurring behind the politicians' backs. That probably is one of our kind of our guiding lights. And, the police have done questionable things that have been discovered over the last few years. But certainly they could actually be our saviours in regards to that.
In some of the regions, 9 out of 43 constabularies at the minute, there are diversion schemes. But there is a paradox that this creates, because then the leniency of the judiciary system of the CPS then creates this feedback in the they then get these statistics of record numbers of people are seeking help for their cannabis addiction because they're being presented to the judge and going, you're either a cannabis addict or you use cannabis. Which are you?
It's funny you should say that, because I actually questioned the guy who made who came up with a report, put in quite a few newspapers saying that 777% over lockdown periods, there had been that rise in people seeking help, and specifically in the range of 45s to 55s, right? And I just thought, well, hold on, lockdowns, boredom, blah, blah, there's so many things, and then, of course, there was the fact that the police admitted that they were targeting cannabis users over that time. So, of course, there is going to be a rise. So I basically asked the guy, I said, did they come willingly or were they sent by the judiciary? No reply whatsoever. And I think that would be something that paints the picture. I mean, that, like I said, the police already admitted that they were targeting cannabis users. I mean, it's easier to target cannabis users than someone who's boiling up some powder on a spoon, I assume.
Yeah, you're going to just lockdown. Burglaries fell off a cliff. Street robbery fell off a cliff. Vehicle crime fell off a cliff. Road traffic accidents fell off a cliff. The cops had nothing to do. No other crime can you smell. And every neighbour that had always hated that one, you sat in your cage and you're hearing the TV through the wall for 4 days, and then you smell a bit of weed and you go, that's the thing I'll get them for. It just became a tool. And you speak of before the judges. Yeah, if you are predominantly an affluent white kid, if you could afford legal representation, Your Honour, this decent, hardworking, upstanding young man, the kid that's gone in there with legal aid, that maybe of a different ethnicity or social class or group, it still allows, the same with the police, their individual prejudice to determine what's happening. Whereas a ubiquitous change of the law means that they can't use their racism, their classism, their misogyny, their whatever it is that they don't like about that other person to then go, I smell weed, I'm going to ruin your day. Because that's all it is. That's what cannabis is, the ultimate social control. The war on drugs is, but cannabis is the most powerful one, because you can't say I smell cocaine. You can't say I smell mushrooms. You can't say, you can say that other behavior would maybe be attributed to that. But most of that, look at the way alcohol presents in terms of the average high street, how animated people are. We're not stopping them because of, oh, you seem a bit hyper, sir. Could you be on a stimulant? Do you know what I mean? Everything is down to that smell of cannabis, that I see a black man in a nice car. How did he get that car? Because I'm a prejudiced 50-year-old white cop, you know what I mean? Or whatever. We see these things continually manifested through and borne out in the statistics and the figures. Yet they're then trying to change that and work around the edges and tinker. And they're going, oh, well, if we actually then create a space for it. No, because I would love to see it. Somebody, please, if you've got it. And I know a lot of you guys listen out there that are patients and involved in the prescription system. How many of the 15,000 people, what their ethnic makeup is right now, what their class makeup is right now? That would be very interesting, because at the minute, to me, it very much still feels like if you have the money, you are safe. Do you know what I mean? There is then even people that are getting lawyers that are then getting retrospectively allowed mitigation for prosecutions because they were advised to get a prescription. You know what I mean? They had the money to quickly get a prescription after they got caught doing whatever crime it was attached to cannabis. And then because they're affording legal representation, they're then helping them with their connections to clinics and then getting them the prescriptions. That's then used in mitigation to lessen the charges. Whereas again, the kid that then just goes, but it's legal, innit? I've just grown 3 plants because of my bad back or because of whatever else. They're getting thrown down because they didn't dress the right way. They didn't bring the additional team with them, their entourage. And it's, again, these manifestations of classism that I can see that are going to get worse, not better, unless we stand up for I'm sorry, but your council estate chav. Your guy that doesn't know any better at this point. He's looking, his Instagram's full of Cali flavors and all the industry going off around the world. They don't care about what's happening with the legal scene right now. But day after day, they are getting kicked out of their houses. They are losing their jobs. They are getting locked up. They are getting their cars taken off them. They're getting their lives ruined. And who's educating them? Who's helping them? Who's defending them? No one. The industry that exists is profiting from their misery, from their ignorance. And this is what I mean of the classist system. And this isn't me having a go at anyone that's a company that's making money. I know a lot of you guys are doing it right and playing the game as you are playing the game, and will compensate the right people and pay into the right movement when it arises. And I think now is that moment for it, because as you're seeing folks in CBD, as we spoke of with what's happening with the so-called low-THC hemp industry with Kyle, as we spoke of with Neil Woods, and the change of the law now that's now changed, the police crime sentence and courts bill. These things take away our ability to protest, to organize. I joked, but I didn't mean it as a joke in Wales. So that might be the last time we can lawfully do that protest, because it's a different climate now. If we don't come together and organize, unionize, standardize our terminology in our fight and what we want from this, they will continue to pick us off one by one, back us into corners and make us say their words. Are you prescription? Are you hemp? Are you CBD? What are you? Or are you a criminal?
Yeah, on that, right? You know, all massive key points. One thing that comes into my head all of the time is the what the coppers say. Like you cannot can't use anything that you later rely on or something like that. It throws me off. But basically, it seems that you need all of your justification there and then on the spot. Right, or at least in the courtroom.
In interview, because you need to provide. Yes, it's your Miranda rights. You need to provide in an interview that which you later rely on in court. Yeah. Yeah.
So on that, I think it would be important to tell your listeners certainly to be aware of the Human Rights Act Article 2. Because it is a just argument, and if you have that ability to prepare that argument on the basis of that, then you will have some people's attention. Equally, there is like the Section 28 defence. Now, this is a bit weird because it's like one set of laws that basically says that there's a get out of jail free card if you can prove that you didn't know that it was an illegal plant. Right now, I'm not telling people to kind of turn around and say, well, hold on, this, it's recreational, blah, 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 feel free. If you're tapped on the shoulder for saying that, for smelling of weed, and you are taking it for a recognised complaint without prescription, just tie the whole thing in. Like, just be blatant about why you use it. blatant about the Human Rights Act. And I'm not saying that'll get anyone off, but it'll certainly gain the interest of the judge. And it will certainly allow you to give a bit of a bolder statement as opposed to, sorry, I won't do it again. Which, let's be honest, 9 out of 10 people who do that are literally out the court doors, straight back home, turning in a fat doobie.
Yeah, and again, and they know this, and it's about then kowtowing down to the authority of the system. Going, do you respect our authority? Do you know you were wrong? Yeah, I'm sorry. And it's the same with the parent figure. That that child is saying those things and doing that just to get out of that situation. And again, it creates this feedback of an erosion of trust in authorities, of respect, of an understanding of anything that should exist in terms of rules. So then, because of the lies of cannabis, this is why we have, in my opinion, a wider drug issue, is that we're told that cannabis is this demon lettuce, it'll destroy everything about your life. People go off and try it at a young age and then go, well, they lied about that. What else did they lie about? And then when they go and try drugs and they have like a couple of nights on ecstasy at a festival or whatever, and then they experience literal ecstasy, as is MDMA, then it's the juxtaposed to them what they were taught, and all of a sudden they can't respect these authorities and institutions, and then therefore they become their oppressor. They are preventing them from freeing and expressing themselves. Whereas I'm saying there's a middle ground, or what I want to build is that middle ground of responsible, informed consumption, conscious consumption of any substance. That if you're making that informed decision, and in the same way that with alcohol, you don't just go buy XXX jugged, moonshine off the shelf. It's got a very specific percentage. You buy Budweiser anywhere in the world, it is Budweiser. Do you know what I mean? There's certain standardization. Cannabis, yes, necessarily doesn't fit into that, but the education and understanding of how terpenes work, of how certain cannabinoid profiles would work with your unique endocannabinoid system. But again, that's such an anathema to what they are building, whereas education would prevent the majority of the dangers of cannabis. And then the other dangers that are currently presented are consequences of prohibition, which actually are going to continue to be heightened, if not worsened, under this current hierarchical paradigm that they're creating with those towers that I was discussing.
It's a dirty word, isn't it, prohibition? But I'd like to think that the people who watch your show are kind of as allergic to it as I am, as well as yourself. Do I see blotches on it there? Yeah. We are at a certain turning point. Before, was it despair comes before hope?
Yeah, yeah.
If no one has said that before, I'm not a big book reader, but I'm looking at my wife for confirmation. Know anyone? Not getting involved. But there are a lot of bits and pieces here that are so in everyone's faces, right? And I've always thought, right, why do you take things away from people? Right, certainly in regards to drugs, I think it's not so much about prohibiting the drugs, it's prohibiting the acts of allowing someone an imagination. Right, now hear me out on this. Right, if you do a 9 to 5, go home, get stuck on watching EastEnders every day, right, you're going to do fuck all after that. Sorry for swearing. Whereas, if you go to a squat party, pop a couple of things, have a good time, have a really good natter with a few people, you might get ideas. You might start talking to someone else who's a little bit liberalized. Oh, that could be dangerous. Whereas alcohol, that doesn't matter because you might have imagination, but odds are is that you're not going to remember much of it the next day. And that is kind of... is it population control? Yeah, I think lots of people have suspected it for a long time. Is it that war against the plant? Well, the plant's named, but there's a lot of other drugs out there. And certainly it's an interesting thought to consider that actually that is what they are trying to ban. You having free will, imagination. Like I said, they want you to go and play computer games, some Germans in a World War II game or something like that, because after that, your brain's frazzled. It's all its imagination. It's done all its thinking. Whereas, go and have a spliff with a couple of mates, talk about the world. These kind of conversations could be dangerous.
Yeah, it's entirely. I mean, it's, yeah. That is the nail on the head. I mean, John Ehrlichman confirmed this in the 90s, the Nixon advisor on drugs, when he basically said that, did we know about the war on drugs being wrong? Well, yeah, but doing so allowed us to, vilify the communities that we would demonize, vilify and demonize the communities that we were at war with, which to them was Black America and the anti-war left and the hippie movement. And by attributing sort of cocaine and heroin to the blacks and by attributing cannabis to the hippies and the anti-war, they couldn't criminalize their ideas of being against the war, but they knew that in those meetings they would have drugs. So then you could just raid them. And then now it moved from just the organization to the individual. So in a lot of areas, police have a lot more information on drugs than you would be aware of, folks. But a lot of these ones in the recent decade, especially since the great work of Mike Barton and the late Ron Hogg, they're prioritizing them. Because they're understanding that actually, if we just go and get Mike, who's got 4 plants down the road, really, how much are we going to go spend on that? We need, 20 dudes to go through the door. We need the 3 vans. We need this, overtime, etc. They're trying to target the larger growers and they're trying to hit these 5,000, 10,000, whatevers. But it's like Hydra. They're playing this whack-a-mole that's then increasing the numbers of them. That's then, as I said, decreasing the smaller numbers. And so there needs to be this kind of parley, I think, ultimately between the police and the community in some way to go like, the politicians are fucking us. They're building a private elitist classist system on top of us. They're exploiting your pensions. They're collapsing your income because of council tax arrears being the most predominant form of arrears for individuals in this country, which is leading to then taxes being put up in other areas, and all of that money is what funds the police. So therefore, the harder the police police us, the less money we're paying in council tax, the less money is going into police, and it becomes this habitual cycle. If we can get them to understand these mechanisms and actually go, well, all right, open your little club, open your little coffee shop, open your little cafe or whatever, self-regulate your model. We'll keep an eye on you. We'll make sure there's no other drugs. We'll make sure you're not doing anything bad. Do you know what I mean? They have to, I think, start having those conversations. That's what happened in the jurisdictions in Holland and in Spain. The national governments weren't budging, but then the local mayoral councils and the townships and whatever else, they started having these conversations. And it was then tacit agreements with the policing institutions that meant that they kind of went, well, all right, they exist. I smell it, but I don't smell it. Do you know what I mean? I see it, but I don't see it. And that's what we need in this country. And that's what I'm saying deschedulization will give us, is that the guys that want to run the coffee shops, that want to run all of these hundreds of different businesses, all of that creativity of this community of millions of people will be let loose into modern capitalism. And that will only benefit everybody, the entire community, the entire economy. And from that, the best will survive through the unfortunate neoliberalistic principles. Do you know what I mean? But at least everyone was given the opportunity from the get-go, or at least somewhat of an opportunity, because obviously capital from other investment means that others will have way more of an advantage.
The dream to go against your class, like, you shall not let the peasants have that plant. What?
And I know I'm quite acutely aware classism is probably one of my biggest impediments to my activism work, but also probably one of my largest strengths. Because the other community I want to represent, I've lived in Durham, and the places that I've lived in Durham are some of the most impoverished of the entire country, if not were classified. Durham was classified as the 3rd most impoverished region of Northern Europe in, I think, 2019. I don't know what the current statistics are. And I look at these people and I look at them living on the drug trade, and I see literally kids getting fed because somebody's uncle sold a 20 bag. Do you know what I mean? And I watch those mechanisms and I understand that, and I see them losing their money hand over fist because the corner shops are now closed and you have corporate supermarkets, and then they're getting rid of the post office and all of the smaller jobs. Then these incomes are collapsing, these economies are collapsing, and we're just buying everything in from these corporations. And again, where's that tax going? Offshore. Drugs are the only thing that are keeping liquidity in most of our communities. If they truly stopped the war on drugs and the trade of drugs, people would starve. Truly, people would starve. And I think what we need to do is recognize that the ones of us in the community that, we sell drugs and we do whatever, we grow weed, we do whatever. I'm speaking as the community here. But they're not criminals. They wouldn't rob you. They wouldn't break your legs because they owe you a tenner. They wouldn't burn down your house. They're not going to steal their electric. Do you know what I mean? If Ethel in the street, have you tried CBD? Do you want to try a bit of this THC tincture I made? Do you want to? They're active members of their communities. They are decent folk that are criminalized. If we could somehow work with the police and stop them being our oppressors, we could target the criminals together. But the issue is, and I discovered this when I first got into this in 2016, 17, at the higher levels, a lot of the criminals and a lot of the people in the higher levels of the police and the politicians, they share the same bed. And I truly mean that. If you want to actually look at how this has worked, if you look at Britain's place as a global drug dealer since the 1600s, it's a continual chain, and it's all classist, baby, because prohibition was started by them to oppress the Indians, to oppress the Chinese. You know what I mean? Look at what we did with the Opium Wars and the Century of Shame. You know what I mean? It's those same mechanisms, but on micro populations, whether it be the Northerners and the miners that dared rebel against Thatcher, or whether it be, you know, the Welsh that we don't like because they have their own language, or the Scots because they're way up there. Do you know what I mean? Or whatever it is that...
Not why you hate, like people hate the Welsh. It's because we've got a better flag, and of course, you know, Welsh male voice choirs. I mean, you guys can't do that.
Yep. I can hear the English aristocracy screaming. Well, fuck them. I'm for devolution of everything, baby. I'm for literally give Wales back a nationhood, give Scotland back a nationhood, you know, for the reunification of Ireland post all of this sectarian shite, and for basically an independent North, frankly.
An independent North. Do you watch Star Trek at all?
Yes, so some series.
Next Generation?
I know some of it because I suppose a bit before my time, or yeah, probably a bit before my time.
Where Data mentions the reunification of Ireland in 2024. That was actually banned over here because it was deemed as provocative. But I saw it a couple of years ago when I just introduced my good lady wife to Star Trek. And the thing is, I believe something happens in the council elections that certainly would push towards that kind of way. Wasn't it Sinn Féin had the vast majority of seats?
Interesting. Very interesting. I love how culture sort of and art are in this ever beautiful dance, you know what I mean, where one just generates the other, and you can never quite tell what is going to be. And a conceptual idea appears in mass media, and then 20 years later somebody invents it and creates it and does it. You know, like Star Trek has been at the precipice of this for quite a long time, in terms of like the visors that became like the Google glasses, you know, GPS and the handheld devices and things like this. They may be right. You know, we've seen The Simpsons be eerily accurate over the past 30 years, so there may be something to this mass media predictions.
But do you have any predictions about cannabis, though?
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's interesting that the one of the more recent Star Trek series, their spore drive is powered by mycelium, and their engineer is named after Paul Stamets, the mycologist. So there are movements, and again, I think in some ways that also shows this whitewashing and gentrification that we're seeing far accelerating in psychedelics than we ever saw in cannabis. There's these same groups of people that we're talking about trying to narrow access and profit and patent are the vultures picking apart the corpse of psychedelic culture, because we've been so highly criminalized and demonized over decades that unless you've gone toward the medicinal side of it and had some protection, you are going to prison for a long time. If you dared, synthesize and produce LSD, that technically in this country, you still life in prison. So, 25 lives is the Class A production and distribution of LSD.
I'm going to have to...
I believe that. I'll have to double check that. I'm pretty sure that is the case, though.
I actually, forgive me for stepping down memory lane, but I remember being on a train in Germany with a load of us on the top deck all smoking. And then all of a sudden, armed police started running on each side of the train, and we thought, oh my God, first down one side, we all the other side to try and ditch our bongs onto the tracks, and then there was a load of other people. Basically, because we were at a station, it was dealt with. We found out that some guy had been caught with 100,000 trips. And the thing is, you get caught with one trip in Germany, apparently that's one manslaughter. So, he decided that 100 manslaughters was worth enough him trying to make a run for it. And apparently he might have even tried to dive in front of the train. However, the train wasn't moving at the time. So, he got taken away. But, slight sidetrack. My apologies for that.
No, good for going down memory lane. Give me an opportunity. I don't know where I've pulled this from. It's 7 years imprisonment and a maximum fine. an unlimited fine. I'm trying to see if I pulled it out of the US. It's something that I've read somewhere. So it might have been from Leif Fielding's book or somebody else's book about acid in the 60s and 70s. So I think it may have been when they first put the charges together, they were trying to make it life. And I think that may have been in relation to the US and not the UK. But I'm just confused my anecdotes. At least we've corrected that. Yeah, it's maximum 7 years. So if there are any budding chemists out there, 7 is a lot less than 25 to life, folks. Just saying.
Although, to be perfectly honest, 25, I mean, I've learned one thing about people who come out of prison. Don't challenge them to chess thinking you're going to kick their ass.
Because that's one of the only real games you've got inside. And actually, I'm going to have to round this up in the next sort of 15. So one thing I did want to touch on, and sorry that you happen to be the guest that has this conversation, but it is relevant to news that has occurred, and we are talking about life prison sentences. As a lot of you will be aware, folks, there was a prosecution of a former activist here in the UK. We've intimated to who this individual is with allegations from the UPA previously with Carly Barton and Clark French episodes of the podcast. But yeah, 3 days ago, I think it was now, Jonathan Liebling was sentenced to 27 years for 2 counts of rape, 2 counts of assault by penetration, sexual assault. Unfortunately, they've also tacked on supply of a Class B drug, which is in cannabis, 2 counts of intimidating a witness. This is sent ripples kind of through the community, and I think we have to be mindful that he's not representative of anybody else other than himself in this.
Absolutely. It's a bit of a messed up affair, isn't it? I mean, I know that there's a few people who had uncertainty, certainly when there was that allegation of data theft from the UPA. Me personally, I've come across him a couple of times online where he's decided to reply to something that I put up, not in a particularly friendly manner, if I remember correctly. But no way whatsoever was, I think, as well as a lot of people kind of thought that kind of thing would happen. I mean, condolences to, it's more than one girl, isn't it? I thought.
I think I've got, I believe it's to the allegation of one. I've pulled up the article here, which will include below. It was reported in the Reading Chronicle. Obviously, she was prosecuted at Reading Crown Court. It was due to one. It was one girl who was at the time was under the age of 16. I believe she was 15 at the time. I'll obviously include the link to this so you can read through it yourself, but it seems to have been carried out across quite a period of time. The mother was distressed and had contacted social services and police, but little intervention was made, it would seem. And again, I share sort of condolences to the victim and to the families, to the family involved. It's unfortunate that the reason I think this is going to gain some traction in media is the fact that they can sensationalize it and attach it to cannabis, and they can somehow kind of draw these two, in their eyes, social ills together. Whereas there is not one person, I can guarantee you, in the cannabis community, industry, lawful and unlawful, that defends or would condone anything close to these charges, to these offences that have been committed. Well, I wasn't even going to say allegedly there, because he's been prosecuted. They've been committed now then by Jonathan Liebling. And yeah, I wanted to highlight this as something that has happened in the community, so that we try and set this precedent and standard moving forward. The point of this podcast is openness and transparency, and try to show the good with the bad. And for all this has happened, and the media have kind of tried to tack it onto cannabis. His actions are done years after his involvement in the campaign, years after the allegations of theft of data and what happened with the sort of internal destruction of the UPA and the creation of a few of the companies thereafter, which I'm not going to name, that then subsequently were disbanded. But yeah, I just felt it necessary and pertinent to address that. I'm sorry for the details of anybody. Maybe should have given a trigger warning for that. But if you do want to read forward, it's horrible details, but it will be in the article. Again, I'm sharing that just for posterity of history, I guess. But thank you, dude, for letting me say that.
the potential for people to jump on that bandwagon. I mean, there has been some seriously questionable content that has come out in the press in regards to the evils of supposed evils of cannabis, whether it's THC edibles that turn out to be synthetic, whether it's some guy who stopped smoking and then smoked 2 grams of hash in a bong, had a psychotic episode and chopped his own manhood off. There has been quite a few things. So you can only think that those who like throwing out these stories could well be jumping on there very soon. Alcohol and cannabis. I mean, let's be honest. I tried that combo when I was young, and it was never pretty. And to use that to do what he's done, I mean, that's questionable. I don't think that would be the case if it was just cannabis, but then that's probably a very stupid thing to say and whatnot. However, certainly with the combination of the two, that's shocking. No one should use anything like that. No one should go against anyone's consent. No one should ever sleep with anyone underage, and no one should try and groom. I mean, those are sensible things there, and yet he's broken, if not all of them.
Yeah, and I hate to kind of preface or add to this, if cannabis wasn't illegal, if the situation was different, then there would be a specific sort of crime or ability to report more to the police of giving a minor a drug. So in the same way that if a non-family member would give a minor some alcohol, that would be immediately dealt with by the police. There is the mechanisms for engagement there. Whereas then cannabis, then you'd have to then prove possession and supply. It gets muddied in with other charges and offences. You know what I mean? And then, as we said before about prioritization, there will have been these allegations of inappropriate behaviour, but then they'll have seen the cannabis would be the mechanism by which they would get it. And if neither held strong ground in their opinion, being the police, the investigators, that would have allowed it to continue for a period of time. But I think that if the laws were different, I think the situation may have been different. I mean, at least if the laws were different, he wouldn't have been involved in this goddamn campaign, and maybe would have been in a different mindset. Because I mean, it's horrible because it's commented on they opened the article by stating a self-proclaimed anti-misogynist. Do you know what I mean? And the language that is a humanist and former campaigner. So the way he's touted himself then almost muddies those monikers, those titles. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think really though, if you look at this story in depth, I mean, the police do have a level of responsibility, and one of the things that has been, highlighted recently is the way that the police take some of these claims, how seriously they take them. I know I was reading something the other day about a lady who went through that as a policewoman, and she was told by her officers that there's no point in making a complaint because nothing will come of it. She ended up taking it up in a civil case, and that was highlighted. But the thing is, that's with their own, and we the way that they treat us versus them in a general kind of aspect. So, you can only, the poor mother as well, reinforced her trying to say something, and yet obviously it just wasn't picked up on. Are the right villains being labelled in that?
I mean, obviously, the perpetrator is always the predominant villain, I guess, in the story here, in this story. But there are other factors at play, as you state, and I think, unfortunately, some of it's going to come down to probably a misogynistic attitude within the police of, well, how old is a 15-year-old really? Do you know what I mean? If you then think of, I'm not stating this, I'm just stating the age of consent in this country is 16. We have an issue within the press of predominantly showing ever younger models and actresses. We have this mechanism where basically you hit 30 as a woman and you're out of society. You know what I mean? You're not represented until you get to your grandmother age, and then you've got the maternal role and you're allowed to present that. I think there's those mechanisms combined probably make then a thing of, well, she's making her own choices. Do you know what I mean? I think of myself at 15, 16, and I was an adult. I'm a man. I could go and do whatever the hell I want. Do you know what I mean? I think it's obviously more difficult these days as a parent to, and I say police a child, but then obviously there must be other factors in play that allow someone who is, we've heard, if you've seen on social media, the comments of the number of people that have interacted with him that said they got a creepy vibe. Do you know what I mean? So there's got to be other factors that have allowed him, if he's presenting that kind of vibe, to still worm his way into a familial situation that he shouldn't have been in.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've seen all of them as well, and kind of the people I've talked to kind of indicated exactly the same thing, that they got a mad vibe from him. But I can also say that every single person I've talked to has been absolutely shocked by it. Getting a dodgy vibe off someone. It's another thing actually waking up and seeing that they've done something dodgy. I mean, that's realization then, isn't it?
Yeah, it's next level, really, isn't it? It is. And I think this is an opportunity for us as a community to kind of band together. You see something, say something. You know what I mean? There's, for all maybe, I'm not sure how I agree with the tactics. There's a couple of accounts on Instagram that are, quotes, putting people on blast, that are, exposing criminal convictions of vendors and dealers and things like this, and where people are committing, actual crimes and, being a villain to society. And I think we need, in some ways, more of this, not in a way of just throwing around allegations and going on a giant witch hunt amongst ourselves, but I think we need to kind of create our own foundation of ethics and responsible, interactions and communications around how we deal with this plant and this culture. If we truly want to be part and present of the world when the war is over, we'll have to deal with the authorities. We'll have to deal with the police, with the council, with your neighbors, with the people that will still hate you for being weed, even when you're lawfully allowed to do it. We have to remember that not everyone is suddenly going to think like you will when that piece of paper is ripped up. We have to learn to live with each other. And part of that is acceptance. But the other side is to understand that just because he breaks the law because he does weed, and I'm not saying grass for drug offense, I'm not saying grass on anybody at all here. I'm saying like highlight amongst ourselves. If you see some inappropriate behavior, if you see something, protect each other. You know what I mean? We're seeing vendors rob each other. We're seeing vendors close down each other's accounts. You know what I mean? There's somebody got robbed outside of an event not recently. We've discovered spice in the community being sold. You know what I mean? We have to have our own backs here, because no one's going to have it, and they're going to use these things when somebody exploits a minor, which was an offence that happened in the UK recently in the community for personal gain. That needs highlighting. You know what I mean? That kind of behavior, and we can't glorify that, but we also need to not allow that to fall into the mainstream media for them to paint this narrative. We have to control ourselves, regulate ourselves, and do it in a meaningful way. And I'm not saying I've got here's your terms and your rules. I don't have a fucking clue. I'm just saying that if we can move forward with this, ensure that we are only breaking cannabis laws, that we are not bad people, then we win more of the ground, I think. Whereas they can currently paint us and point to, well, that guy sells coke as well. These guys broke this guy's legs because they owed him $1,000 over some weed, or this guy did, you know what I mean? And point to these other acts of antisocial behavior and of actual criminality and paint us all with the same brush. In the same way, I worry that this Liebling story may come to harm the advocacy movement.
Yes. Fingers crossed that it. I mean, he certainly already caused a lot of damage. And I, as we're on this topic, I'd just like to say that, to anyone out there who has, gone through that as well, please do approach the police, because, that story didn't really paint a good picture, but you'd like to think that they'd be on the ball, considering the bad publicity they certainly would have got from that. And there is reforms going on, I believe, in regards to how police do deal with any of these types of crimes. Certainly being more sympathetic towards the woman's ordeal is absolutely a must for them.
I would preface that by saying victim, because there are plenty of young men that are being groomed and being harmed in this country through sexual abuse.
Yeah. Let's not forget that it's not really a something that is absolutely defined by sex, but certainly when it comes to what the police have been highlighted for recently, it does seem it is more favourable for the bad person than the person who's had bad done to them in that kind of situation.
Yeah, and I think on that break of sunshine through that little bit of cloud that we ended on there, I think we're gonna have to round up because I need to hit the road. Dude, been a pleasure as always. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I feel a lot more informed about what's currently going on in the CBD industry and a bit more outraged. So that means I am informed. So I hope my listeners are as well. I'll include links to Hemp Hound below, and obviously we'll include some of the articles that you've written and referenced, because there is some powerful points. They are passionately written, and I think hopefully should help to inform the dialogue and discourse around this, because we need to get moving and moving fast, and we get there faster together, frankly, folks.
Excellent, and absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Stop with this recreational kind of medicinal thing. It's one plant for everyone, not part of the plant for some of the people.
Hell yeah, and that's the best way to end this. Brother, it's been a pleasure. Folks, if you enjoyed this, do check us out on patreon.com/Simpa Life, where for less than a cup of coffee, you can help me keep the lights on in my new studio. We'll be seeing soon. Hopefully by the start of, what's the next month? June, I think it is. First episode in June will be in the new studio. So yeah, check us out on all social media platforms. Be good to each other. We're back next week with your man himself, Si from Hampshire. See you later. Peace and love, folks.
Bye.